she studies sea snails at the seashore. This is Chapter 11 of Author Talks with Lisa T. And coming up, I chat with Abbi Waxman about her delightful new novel featuring a marine biologist who finds herself dragged back into the concrete jungle when someone from her past reappears. Plus, Abbi shares why she's obsessed with Gen Z. But first, I asked her to set up Christa Comes Out of Her Shell.
So the book is about a character called Christa Little. She is a marine biologist. And when the book begins, she is in the middle of the Indian Ocean studying violet sea snails, which are fascinating and very shy creatures, and living the life that she really has always wanted to live. You know, she does her science. She has a beautiful apartment that she loves. Everything is great, right? And about 25 years before the book begins, her father, who was a sort of famous TV naturalist, like Bear Grylls or The Crocodile Hunter or someone like that, had a TV show for kids, disappeared in a plane crash over Alaska and has been presumed dead this entire time. And at the beginning of the book, it turns out that he's not dead, far from it, and has been basically hiding for the last 25 years, and now he's back. So she has to come back to Los Angeles, where she's from, and where she had a very traumatic teenage sort of celebrity meltdown, and be with her mother and her sisters, with whom she has a somewhat fraught relationship, and deal with the fallout from her dad's sudden reappearance, which obviously the world is fascinated by, and which turns into a huge media circus and is her worst nightmare. Plus there's a guy that she fancies. And so it's all a bit of a cluster for her. But yeah, that's how the book starts out.
I loved her as a narrator. She's funny, she's observant, and she's also so matter of fact. And I guess that plays into her role as a scientist working with these snails, because she's so different from the other female characters that you've written. I mean, everyone tends to be a little bit quirky, a little bit maybe not so great with being around people, a little awkward, but she's felt a little different. She felt like the most outgoing. She's
the most outgoing, but at the same time, the most misanthropic, right? She doesn't really like people, and she certainly doesn't trust people. But I think she views them the same way she views her snails, as a sort of interesting species to be observed. But she doesn't trust them because when she was a teenager, she sort of had minor celebrity as a child because of her father and because of her father's disappearance. And so she was very much in the public eye, and then had a very sort of public Lindsay Lohan-esque, falling apart, poor Miss Lohan. And sort of fled into academia in order to escape that. And so she doesn't trust people, but she's not afraid of people in the way that some of my characters have been in the past. She's just she doesn't like them. She just doesn't like them very much. And so she doesn't really care so much what they think about her. And she has sort of a fuck you attitude to the whole lot of us. And her journey is to sort of come to a place where she realizes not everybody is a horrible human being, although there are horrible human beings in the book.
Yes, there are. We'll get to them. So why snails and not something like cute and cuddly?
Because I've always loved snails.
Really?
So yeah, I have a tattoo of a snail on my wrist. I've always loved snails, mostly garden snails, obviously, because I don't, not a marine biologist, but I've always loved snails. They're sort of, I know spirit animal is not a good phrase to use these days because, it carries all kinds of other connotations that I don't have a right to. But I feel they are my guiding principle is the snail. Like, move slow, you'll get there. Carry you home with you everywhere you go. Slow progress is better than no progress, that kind of thing.
I think a lot of us could live by that. Maybe a few more of us should live by the code of the snail.
Code of the snail. I feel a lot of affinity for snails. And so when it came to a time to pick something that she would study, that was a very easy choice for me. And then I just picked the prettiest snail I could find, which is the violet sea snail, which are so beautiful. And fascinating. They float around on the surface of the ocean on little boats made of their own mucus.
Fascinating.
Right. Fascinating, creepy, a little bit gross, and inventive, so they work with what they've got. And I admire that. They're like, shit, we're floating around at the top of the ocean. Help. I know I'm going to sneeze, and then cling to it.
Well, and that goes along with carrying your home with you, right? You might as well carry around what you're making of your boat with you too.
Exactly. And they just float about carried by the currents, but making the most of it. And I sort of felt that was appropriate for her too. She sort of gets carried along and makes the best of it.
And it also lent itself to a great title.
It did. It did, although the titles are always such a pain in the butt. And that was a title that I suggested really early on. And everyone was like, oh, that's funny. And then moved on to ask for like another 200 different titles, which we went through endlessly. And eventually we circled back and came back to that. I think I made out it was someone else's idea, and then it was fine. So
Isn't that always how it goes, right?
It's fine. A good idea doesn't care who had it, right? That's yeah, I'm happy with the title. It's cute.
So I was a little bummed actually that I read your book on an e-reader because, throughout the story there are these little notations for footnotes, right?
There are, and they couldn't do it in the.
It wasn't until I got to the end of the book that I was like, oh my God, there are actual footnotes and they're really funny. So if anyone's listening, go get yourself a hard copy because I think that's the best way to enjoy reading it because they're all footnotes from Christa's point of view and they're hysterical.
Thank you. I think you can click on the footnotes, but you have to know to click on the footnotes. So, there'll be like a little number or a little symbol, but you have to actually click it to get the footnote. This was a huge battle. Sadly, the audiobook doesn't have them at all.
Oh, no.
It's very hard to do
footnotes
when you're reading a book out loud. I mean, it's sort of somehow it works when you're reading it in your head, and it doesn't work so well for the audiobook. And we went back and forth trying to make it work, and some worked easy and some worked badly, and so it became sort of difficult. Rather than make the audiobook editor's life a total misery, I said let's just lose them. It doesn't matter. It's not because they're not germane to the story. They're just her, free associating things.
And did those come to you as you were writing it, or were they something extra?
No, they came as I was writing it. Like they would just, because it's in her voice. She just, it just sort of she would have those thoughts. And so I would make the footnotes, and I love footnotes. And so, it just seemed appropriate. She's a scientist. Of course, she's going to annotate her book.
Yeah, it made perfect sense. And I should have tried to click on it. I'm going to have to know that for the next time I stumble across an ebook with footnotes. I want to get back to the story because I think some of the biggest laughs I had from this book. I love the skewering of LA culture, Hollywood culture, of social media, of the way the younger generation uses social media and like just innately knows what to do, and everyone else around them is like, okay, right. Not to mention the public's attention span. I know you have an advertising background. Was this a form of therapy for you, or was it it helped in writing, the story from this point of view?
It didn't hurt. And I also have 3 teenage daughters. So I've sort of witnessed firsthand the derisive expression that they get when I attempt to do anything on social media, and the sort of horror with which they view my participation in their world, their online world. And I've lived in LA for 17 years now, and I'm fortunate to have agents amongst my friends. And so skewering agent culture was fun. And and I'm fascinated by celebrity, not by celebrities particularly. Like I don't follow celebrities or anything like that, but I'm fascinated by this sort of false intimacy that we all have with them, that we think, oh, they're just like us, and we think we know them. We think we know them. And so when you meet one, which happens all the time in LA, you sort of have this foreknowledge about them. So you're meeting someone for the first time, but that they've been married 3 times. That they're sober or not sober. That they eat hot dogs. You know all this stuff about them, and it's sort of A, unfair because they don't know jack diddly about you, and B, fallacious, right? You don't actually know anything about them at all. You know just what's been in the media, which is often completely false and untrue. And so I was interested to write about that from the sort of normal person's point of view, and then also from the celebrity's point of view, like what that must be like, So that was sort of a driving force. And there are characters in the book that embrace it and enjoy it and exploit it, and then Christa hates it, right? So it was fun to do both. But yeah, there are a couple of younger characters, 2 that work in the agency who are very, sort of Gen Z, and because I have 3 of them, I love Gen Z. I'm obsessed with them, and as they would say, and So I wanted to make sure they were there.
And Christa has this extra layer of having been, a child celebrity. As you mentioned at the top, her father is famous and disappears, and her mom sort of drags her, because she's the youngest of the three girls, into the spotlight with her to fill the void. And
Exactly.
Everybody thinks they know her as this cute little girl who played with animals. And then, as you mentioned, she did something in her teenage years that has really just turned her off society. And I think that's really what turned her off on people.
Totally. I mean, I think the whole experience of being sort of so exposed, and then, because that's the thing that the media does, right? They build you up, and they create a picture of you that makes you nice and easy to package. And then if you do something, like she got into drinking and drugs and got into all kinds of trouble, if you do something like that goes against what they've said, then they take great delight in pillaring you and, taking you apart for public sport. And so she was a victim of that.
Now, you have a little bit more anonymity as a writer, people.
Lots of it, in fact.
So you really don't run into this issue, even though people might maybe recognize your name, or maybe they'll recognize your voice from interviews you're doing. Do people run into you and think they know everything about you? Like if they heard you or listened to you or read what you've done?
I'm so not famous that's never really happened. I think I've been recognized in public once, and mostly that was because a new book was coming out, and so my picture was in the bookstore up the street. It was very much like a local sighting. I think if you want to be sort of visually famous, being a writer is the worst possible thing to pick, because I very rarely venture outside of my house.
So I'm going to guess you don't want to be visually famous then. You're happy with
it's
where
horrific.
you are.
And doing the events that I do around the books is enjoyable because I'm talking about books. So things like this are great fun to do because we're just talking about the work, and it's great. But when I have to do readings or public appearances, I get really quite nervous, and it's fine once I get going, because again, we're really just talking about the work. But the thought that anyone would actually then be asking personal questions or, digging into my, my messy teenage history,
something
horrific.
You share with Christa then.
Something I definitely share it with Christa, and I'm enormously grateful to be a Gen X and not a Gen Z, because no one was filming and taking photographs of me, hammered on the floor of the pub, and if those photographs had followed me around, it would be mortifying. And I'm very, very grateful for Generation X's childhood. We had a lot of privacy and anonymity. We were feral and raised by wolves and drank hose water. But, it was...
But there are no pictures of it, and you're fine.
There are no pictures, so nobody knows. Yeah.
I've always said that, too, because I'm an elder millennial. And,
right.
The fact that, you were able to do silly, stupid things and not worry that someone was ready to, either snap a picture, post it on Instagram, or, live stream it somewhere on some platform while you were doing it and didn't have even a say in, what was going out there. I can't even imagine being a teenager nowadays.
No, it's hard enough to be a teenager, period.
Amen.
Right? Sort of a crucible of shrapnel and flying bodies. And so the thought that at your most difficult and tenuous time that people are going to exploit you, and then that is then going to be following you wherever you go, is really harsh, I think. I feel I have a lot of sympathy for Gen Z. I have a lot of sympathy for millennials as well. Basically, I think Gen X was the last one to get away with it.
I love the sisters. I love Christa's sisters. Is there any chance you're going to spin them off and give us their own stories? Because I just feel they each have books they could star in.
It's like you're the second or third person who's asked me this question, so I hadn't thought of it, but maybe I should.
Maybe. Their dynamics were just so much fun. Between I can totally see me with my siblings in how they treat each other as adults. There are things you did in childhood that when you all get together, they assume you're still that same person. And you assume they still see you that same way, I
think as soon as you step back into your family, you become the child that you were, and I talk about that a bit in the book, but it's really difficult to reorient yourself in a family. I think it's just almost impossible. And Christa tries very hard to not be seen as the mess up that she was, but it's hard for her sisters to let go of it, and then it's hard for her to let go of their judgment, right? And to see that they themselves have been in therapy and they're working on it, and they're trying to not be such jackasses. And So I'm interested in that as well, in how family dynamics change over time. My kids are now 22, 20, and coming up 17. So they're not really children so much anymore, particularly the older ones. And it's, and you see the relationship change and shift, and it's interesting. Ask me again in 20 years.
For that, when that book comes out.
Right.
I know that Christa is named after a real life reader of yours.
Can
you share that? Can you share that story?
Yeah. So Christabel Little is a real person who lives in near Durham in England, and who, when the book, The Bookish Life of Nina Hill came out, she really liked that book, and she carried a copy of the book around Durham on like a day trip that she was doing, and like took pictures of herself with the book at like Durham Cathedral and having tea and like doing all these various things to show me that Nina had spent the day doing interesting things, right? Which was just such a cute idea and so funny and adorable in every way. And her name is such a great name. Christabel Little is just an excellent name. And so I stole her name. I did ask permission, and she and I correspond fairly regularly. And I asked her permission, and I said, she's not going to be a squeaky clean character. Is that okay? And she's like, yes, that's fine. And yeah, so I think she's pleased.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Do you know what she thinks about the book and about her namesake?
I think she loves it. Or she says that she loves the book, and she likes the character, and she likes the dedication. And yeah, she's altogether an entirely satisfactory reader. I'm very fortunate, and readers write to me a lot, and it's easily the best part of my job is getting letters from readers. It's awesome.
She's going to have to go get a snail tattoo now too.
She is. She is, and I wouldn't stop her. I wouldn't. I think it's never too late to get your first snail tattoo.
So tell me, what else are you working on?
What's next is actually something a departure. My next book will be out next year, and it's going to be a mystery.
Ooh.
It is a mystery because it's already written.
Love mysteries.
Yeah, it's detective. So I have a contract for 2 detective books, starring Natasha Mason and Julia Mann, who are an old lady and a young lady, and they team up to solve crimes. So it'll be, I hope, a series of detective novels. They're cranky. There's a lot of back and it's me, right? So it's not serious. It's not noir or like Swedish, scary mysteries. It's pretty straightforward detective fiction, and it's funny, and there's a lot of back and forth and sarcasm and the usual thing for me. And they're both sober alcoholics, and it's not about getting sober. It's about they happen to be sober people who are solving crimes. So that's a thread that runs through it. And yeah, I'm very proud of it. I think it's the best work I've ever done. So I'm looking forward to that. That comes out next year.
I love that you're doing an intergenerational set of characters. I find that women have so many, tend to have more friendships that span an age range than maybe men do. And it's so refreshing to see there are more and more authors now who are really starting to explore and mine what those relationships are like. So, and the fact that it's a mystery and they team up together and they're cranky, I love it.
Yes, and then they're going to go into business together and continue to solve crimes. But yeah, and it's not all about jokes about being old or young either. It's just, they come to each other as individuals, as people, and they do make digs at each other all the time, but that's just the nature of their relationship. And then they gradually, come to be very close and love each other. So, yeah, I'm hopeful that people will like. I hope that people will like the team and like the books. So
there won't be footnotes.
Sadly, there will be no footnotes. It's called One Death at a Time, and it'll be out next year, but no footnotes, sadly.
All right. Well, if people want to read something with footnotes, they can pick up Christa Comes Out of Her Shell. Abbi Waxman, thank you so much for spending time with me today to talk about it.
It was my absolute pleasure. Anytime.
And that's where we close the book on this chapter. Next time, Italian superstitions run amok when the man of one woman's dreams asks her to marry him with the ring of her nightmares. Intrigued? Then be sure to subscribe to this podcast and sign up for my newsletter at lisatbooks.com so that you never miss an episode. You can also find me on Instagram and X at Lisa T Books. I'm Lisa T. Keep turning those pages.